I'll move on to question number 2, which is that the London Plan states that boroughs should require all applications for major development to include a statement on the potential implications on sustainable design and construction principles, including energy assessment and long-term management. And obviously that would enable the most sustainable design, and for us to look at the detail of that. Now, should we require that on smaller developments? So there's a certain threshold of applications that get seen by the Mayor of London and that he has powers over. But there's a huge number of applications that sit beneath that threshold and may not necessarily require an assessment. So has anyone got any views about as and when it's appropriate to require a specific assessment on sustainability issues and what types of applications?
Could I ask as a point of information, sorry, Julian Anderson, resident, what the threshold actually is?
In terms of major developments, the traditional threshold is of 10 units for residential or 1,000 square metres. Although I'm aware, obviously, this question is obviously looking at the principle of not just getting hung up on the actual threshold, but just looking at, whether, say, a conservatory, for example, whether we should be asking for a statement in relation to schemes of that size.
I mean, following up on that, the reason I ask is coming from a mathematical background, law of large numbers. You can have, if the ratio is you've got 2 large buildings that qualify and 10,000 small ones that don't, then obviously you've got to bring the small ones in. It's straight mathematics. So I'd have thought the answer there has to be basically a mathematically based one, and will then come straight out of the paper at you.
So would anyone suggest that essentially for any type of application we have a look? I mean, even if you look at something like a new bus shelter, for example, there may be things that they can do with a solar panel to power the lighting on it at nights and things like that. Would there be any support for that? There are a few nods around the room. Okay. And again, if anyone has any concerns about that approach, please also let us know. Thank you.
I think currently for new builds, if it's under the 10 units, there's an environmental performance statement that needs to be completed. If that's correct. That's quite a detailed set of questions that ask not just about carbon emissions, but also about ecological issues and a wider water issues as well. I'm not sure on the suitability of that for a single unit, because it is in terms of time, it's a lot of effort, and perhaps there's replicated work that would be done on a street, for example. So, but definitely in terms of carbon emissions and for raising awareness of how much carbon a household emits or a block of flats emits, I think in terms of raising awareness it is useful to ask the question. But going from there to imposing a minimum 20% carbon emissions on a conservatory or something like that, it's very difficult to know what you can impose afterwards.
Okay, thank you. And there's a gentleman at the back.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, I think the gentleman's point about law of large numbers, the planning process, the application process will get swamped if there are additional issues potentially. And so one of the ways around that is to provide potential guidelines as to what is required of a bus shelter, what is required of a typical single unit build, a terrace to such and such age. These sorts of things that hopefully will come out of either workshops like this, further consultations about these are the measures we will look favourably on, rather than we have to assess each and every application.
Okay, thank you. Okay, there's no more comments.
Sorry, there is
right.
one. Those are the positive things, but there are applications still going forward for people to install patio heaters outside pubs. Many of the shops down Oxford Street have their doors permanently open with a hot air curtain which blasts away all the time. So there's not only sort of the question of looking to improve, there's actually surely a need for policy which bears down in enforcement terms or review terms about the carbon that is just being wasted for no real positive benefit. And that seems to me to be a very urgent priority. But I share the worry the gentleman had that, I mean, there are lots of planning officers in Westminster, but you probably need to double them or treble them if you're going to look at the sustainability of every conservatory and every bus shelter, I would have thought. But anyway.
Thank you.
Actually, just kind of following on from that, is the planning department resourced correctly to actually assess the environmental performance of every single application?
I think that's certainly something that when we take all the options that are put forward, I don't think that should be an initial constraint. But obviously the workability, both in terms of the criteria and resourcing and the burden on not just ourselves but the development industry, and that will all need to be taken into account.
I just wanted to bring up the question of lighting. I mean, Westminster absolutely blares with light, and how much carbon is that? And there might be some guidelines or rules that cut that down.
Right, thank you.
Sorry, can I just add? I think it's important that you don't lose sight of the main goal in planning terms, is that you're a planning department and you have legislation you have to stick to, and you're not you can't deal with how people choose to occupy their buildings in terms of doors being left open on Oxford Street, although it's something which I'm sure as a planning department you would like to impact upon. The realities are that your powers are limited to planning applications and Section 106 agreements and the community infrastructure levy. And I think you need to be realistic in terms of what you can achieve and not try and push the boundaries too far that it dilutes actually what you could be doing.
Okay, thank you.